Hey, welcome back to New Day. It's now time for business, and this morning I've got the lovely Deputy Minister for Transport in the studio, Mrs. Joyce Motawi, and she's going to tell us how the domestic industry is faring. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Okay, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
Are you a football fan?
Well, quite, and I think today we all have nothing actually on our minds except
The Black Stars.
The Black Stars.
Okay.
So I would like to seize this opportunity to wish them the very best and to remind them that they are carrying a whole nation's aspirations on their shoulders.
Exactly.
So we look forward to the Black Stars advancing to
the next stage. What do you think our chances are?
Well,
what kind of goal margin are you
Well, I think our
looking
chances are very bright. I'm looking at least a 3-0 sort of scenario. I think that would actually seal it for us. And I think
a win would be good for us right now, wouldn't it? For the nation.
Nothing short of that will do. I think expectations are very high. So yes.
Okay, so all the best to the Black Stars. Now let's get back to business. Now this morning we're talking about the domestic airline industry, but I'd like to start by asking first of all how the industry is faring as a whole, both the domestic sector and the international sector.
Thank you very much. I think that the Ministry of Transport actually oversees, the activities of aviation sector in this country. We have the Ghana Airports Company Limited, and we also have the Ghana Civil Aviation Authority. Both of these institutions are actually tasked with the mandate to regulate and as well as see to operations within the aviation sector in this country. So as we speak now, we have a very competent group of experts handling this particular industry. From my perspective, I would like to say that currently, I think that the aviation sector in Ghana is actually experiencing phenomenal growth. Remember that in all of this, freight alone carried by air is about 48 million tons worldwide. Globally, we are looking at $2.2 trillion in terms of what aviation contributes to the global domestic product, which is about 3.5% of global GDP. So as a sector, aviation is currently experiencing phenomenal growth worldwide, which is actually impacting on our activities here in Ghana. I'm sure if you take a comparative look at the current business environment within the aviation sector and look at the times probably in the year 2000, you would find out that growth has actually been phenomenal. I think your own program actually explained that at 55% growth, it means that business is actually booming. I think what we are looking at now is to try and expand our facilities to meet the rising growth. So I think both locally and internationally. Now, in fact, we have about 42 international carriers flying our airport. And yet about 10-15 years ago, we only had 15. That should tell you that our record is good, the business environment is good, and the business in Ghana within the aviation sector is actually thriving. And I'm sure the records are there.
42 international carriers, that's quite a huge number. Okay, let's come to the local domestic airline industry. What are government's policies regarding this sector?
Well, you may also recall that in 2009, Ghana actually took a decision to liberalize the air licensing regime. What it meant was that we're going to license additional carriers to fly the domestic or local arena. You know that in times past, most of our reliance actually domestically was more on transportation rather than traveling by air.
By road.
Exactly, yes. So once we actually tried to liberalize this sort of industry, what it meant was that more people were now traveling locally by air than it was before. Because in the past, most people only go to the airport because they were going somewhere outside of Accra. But currently, we have all these domestic airlines flying our own regional airports.
How many do we have?
Well, presently, we should have about 5 of them in operation.
Okay.
I think in recent times, City in particular has actually suspended its operations.
They are falling off
so
the wheel.
Presently, we have the other 4 which are still operating competitively and fairly within the industry.
That's about 2010. We had just 2, Amtrak and City, like you just mentioned. And then I think government registered an additional 4, 5 more.
And then we have
Flight 540, Africa World.
Airlines.
Right.
Yes.
Why do you think City Link fell off the rail?
You know, sometimes...
Was the competition just too much for them?
Well, sitting from where I am, it's normally not very easy to decipher what their internal problems may have been. What I can say is that they were licensed to do business. They actually started the operations for quite a while. and then suddenly for some reason or the other they had to suspend. Remember that operation of airlines is actually very heavily funds intensive. You look at the labor, you look at the catering, you look at the networks, you look at all the other facilities that you require to run an airline or a carrier. And sometimes this might prove very difficult in terms of strategies for the individual carrier. I would like to say they may have had some internal problems, but they were not necessarily to do with us as an institution suspending their operations or anything. And I think at the time when they suspended their services, no specific reasons were assigned. And so as far as I know, they are probably still trying to re-strategize and will at some point re-emerge and continue with their operations.
Okay. What accounted for government suddenly registering about 3 or 4 more airlines in such a short period of time?
Well, when we talk about liberalizing air services, it means then that you must also try and inject some sort of competition into the system. And I tend to tell people all the time that competition is good. And don't forget that Ghana is not operating in isolation. We have a whole international civil aviation organization to which we belong. And of course, one of the rules is that we must operate in a liberalized air system. And I think this was one of the reasons why in 2009 we decided to license these airlines. But mind you, for a country such as ours with about 25 million people, I think that even having just about 3 or 4 domestic airlines within itself is not a very big number. And I'm sure that if we had larger facilities and probably had developed all the aerodromes in all the other regional capitals, chances are we'll probably have maybe 10 to 15 domestic airlines operating, because air travel, mind you, is one of the safest, the most secure and efficient. And in terms of time, you cut your travel time by about almost 50% to 100% depending on the distance. So I think genuinely one of the main reasons why we liberalized it was, one, to create competition and of course to open up our country. Remember that travel is one way in which you enlighten yourself, you broaden your horizons, and of course remember the tourist attractions that we have in this country. So when we liberalize our air system, what it means that we also encourage additional and a growth in tourism as well.
Okay. Are there plans or is there room to register more operators?
Well, there's always room for growth all the time. But I think currently, because we are actually trying to expand on our infrastructure, there's been a temporary suspension of issuing of additional licenses. Normally, the regulator is the Ghana Civil Aviation Authority. They license these airlines. And so normally they would advise the ministry and make recommendations on whether or not we should license additional airlines or not. For now, the advice is that even though we have several applications pending, we should hold it off for the time being. That is what we do.
Do you have any statistics for us regarding flight frequency and passenger uplifts in the domestic sector?
Well, specifically, I think presently, I remember looking at the website of the Ghana Airport Company, and it appears that I think from a position of about 122,000 passengers, they are currently lifting about 787,000. But I think these statistics end somewhere in 2012. I believe that currently the airport is actually doing about 1 million people in terms of throughput, both domestically and internationally. What we are looking to do is to achieve a time when we can have at least even 5 million people pass through this airport. Remember that using of this domestic thing is not just for passengers, it's also for carriage of cargo and several other things. So in terms of passenger throughput, I think Kotoka is actually bursting at its seams because it is handling more passengers than it ever has. And in fact, its capacity even is not up to the standard of the number of people that it is actually moving in and out presently. Remember that most people now within Ghana travel for business through these domestic airlines, to Tamale, to Sunyani, to Takrady, to most of these other places that actually have the facilities. We are currently looking at also upgrading some of the other smaller airport facilities that we have. Sunyani is on the drawing cards, so is Tamale, which is currently going through some expansion works. We want to actually upgrade it to the level of an international airport. Kumasi is actually undergoing some very serious expansion works as we speak. So yes, we are actually looking at developing not just the domestic hub, but also the
international one as well. Speaking about Tamale being developed into an international airport, when can we see this come to fruition?
As I speak to you now, I believe that the contract has been awarded. It's a Brazilian company. They are actually mobilizing presently. I'm looking forward to the actual serious business starting over the next few weeks. I think there's a World Cup fever gripping us all, and the World Cup is actually being hosted by Brazil. I'm hoping that the minute the games are over, serious business would start, and that very soon you would all be able to visit Tamale to apprise developments for yourselves in that regard.
Okay, what about infrastructure at the airports themselves? For example, I understand Sunyani has a very short runway or tarmac, which makes it difficult for a certain weight or for bags and passengers and things like that. What are you doing about these things?
Presently, there's a whole drive to actually upgrade most of our regional airports. For those that have, they will see some refurbishment and modernization. Sunyani is one of these airports. Presently, I think Amtrak is actually flying twice a day to Sunyani, and I think it's time for us to actually concentrate on opening up Sunyani Airport for more business, and it's on the drawing cards. We are also looking at upgrading the Wa Airport, and so that is also on the drawing cards. We're looking at a new one in Ho, which is something that we're actually keenly working on. Remember also that Kotoka itself, which is the mother of all our airports here in Ghana, is going through phenomenal changes. The refurbishment is ongoing. The car parks are going to be remodeled, modernized, and in fact, the work has started, especially with the VIP side of it. We're actually going to build an underground car park so that we reduce the congestion at that part of the airport. The actual terminal now, which is phase 2 of the expansion projects, is actually going to be expanded, and that is ongoing. The roof has had some problems recently, and we are fixing the roof as well. Remember also that we want to actually expand the facilities, and we are looking at building a new terminal completely. The runways are also going to be extended. In fact, a new third runway is going to be added to what we have at the Kotoka International Airport. Kumasi is going through the same thing. We are even introducing some airlifting light services to be sure that we are able to undertake services in the evenings as well. So there's a lot of work currently ongoing to upgrade all of our airports.
Right. With the refurbishment of the Kotoka International Airport, we've been hearing this for a very long time now. Do you have any timeline for how long it will take for it to be completed?
Well, you know that these things take a while. We have very laborious procurement processes that we must always adhere to. Sometimes even between the advertisement and the evaluation of proposals, you can be looking at about 3 months. I think that so far for most of the expansion works, for example, to do with the terminal and the runway, all of these evaluation processes have been completed, and in some cases even the contracts have been awarded. For example, with the Terminal 2 building and also with the current car park project. So we're looking at least, give or take, by December, which is probably the peak season for passengers in that airport. I'm hoping that the carousels would actually be up and going, that would have a second one to at least reduce congestion on the ones we have presently. So yes, if you visit the airport now, you would see for yourself that there's a lot of activity going on. And I would like to say that I'm sure passengers would also experience some serious inconveniences, but I'll be asking them all to bear with us. What we all want is to bring Kotoka to the level of an international airport befitting of a country that is facing
the inconveniences we have been enduring for a while now, I must say. I mean, there are some very, very simple things that I believe can be done, or don't you think can be done in the short term, such as the escalator. It hasn't worked in over a year. I don't know why we have to wait till this whole big refurbishment takes place before the escalator can be fixed, or simple things like the air conditioning in the arrival hall doesn't work, the period it takes for the bags to come into the hall, and simple things like that. Can't those be worked on?
Well, all of those things are being worked on. With the escalator in particular, I know it's a huge inconvenience, but I think there are some technical specifications that would need to be satisfied first.
It's been over a year, man.
No, and it's because you remember that this terminal has been in place now for at least about 50 odd years. So most of these things were actually installed in a very, times past. Technology has changed, equipment has changed. So in order for you to refit it, you might find that even the person who initially manufactured this one has probably moved from there. And so what we need to do is to find totally new technology to be able to work on this. But we are all agreed on one thing, that there's a need to improve upon our facilities in that airport. So the escalators, the toilets, the leaking roof, the carousels, all of them are
leaking roofs in the arrival hall. Very embarrassing for tourists coming into the country.
It was actually a type of material that was used at the time, and finding a way to replace it has been very difficult. So the idea now is that we're going to change the whole of the roof to be sure that we at least stem the leakages whilst we construct the new terminal building.
Right. Also, speaking about facilities, the ones in the domestic airports aren't any better. There are no waiting areas. The whole places are congested. Scanners don't work, and so many, for passengers traveling, it's such an inconvenience. What are we doing about the facilities at the local airports as well?
I think just like the ones at the international side of it, maybe you might think that the international portion probably is slightly better than what we have domestically. But I think the domestic one is actually the face of our country as a nation. And I think that should actually consume our attention. I spoke to the managing director of the company this morning, and he has actually assured me that as part of the expansion program, that particular terminal is also going to be expanded, so there will be better facilities for people. I mean, it's really bad when you go there sometimes and you even sit under those tents and the fans aren't working, the air conditioners are off. I mean, if you have a flight to catch and you have to wait like an hour or two, and of course, because of traffic, people tend to get there very, very early. I personally believe that attention should be given more to the domestic portion of that airport, and I think I'll personally follow up on that and consult the minister to be sure that we find a way to improve upon the domestic facilities. Passengers complain. I mean, we all use it, and we go there and we see just how congested the places with the numbers and how ill-equipped the places to handle the number of people using the facilities. Even the domestic airline operators have complained about that, and I think it's something that we are paying keen attention to.
Okay. What about the absence of runway lights on some of the runways, which makes it very difficult or impossible for flights to land after 6 p.m., which will also affect the sector in a way? What are you doing about that?
Well, it wouldn't affect the sector in a way. It actually does affect the sector, and it also inconveniences passengers. And of course, I'm sure that for some of these domestic carriers, they could be doing about 4 in a day, but because of time constraints and the fact that you have to rush in order that sunset doesn't meet you, becomes a challenge. I think Kumasi, for example, some temporary aeronautical lighting systems have been installed pending the completion of the refurbishment, and then a more advanced system will be put in place. Tamale, once it undergoes this new redevelopment, those things will be part of the system.
But isn't that such a basic aspect of, building a runway to have lights there? How did we overlook this?
Well, I don't think it was an oversight. I think at the time when these airports were constructed, remember, nobody was actually interested. We only had Ghana Airways doing the domestic run, and they ran twice a day, so there were really no exigencies in terms of time. What we are experiencing now is a phenomenal growth, and we are also trying very hard to build and improve upon our infrastructure to meet it. Remember that Ghana's safety record is still a very, very good record, and that we are monitoring and keeping safe our airspaces. And I think that as we modernize our airports, all of these facilities that we all would love to see in Ghana will be put in place. But of course, remember that as we are undertaking these refurbishments and remodeling, it will be completely too expensive even to put up these facilities as we go along. What it means is that when we are completing these projects, all of these things that we all would like to see will be part
in place
of the modern airports.
Finally, ma'am, before you go, some of the operators have also raised concerns about the high cost of operation. For example, the price of aviation fuel, which was cited as one of the reasons why Virgin has pulled out of Ghana.
I remember there was a lot of agitation at the time when I arrived at the ministry, specifically to do with the cost of aviation fuel. So in 2013, government actually reduced aviation fuel by 20%. What we envisaged at the time was that reduction would actually impact directly on operations of the domestic airlines. It was actually meant to subsidize their services and operations in a way. I think that has been done, and I think we actually received a lot of commendation at the time. The problem we have now is that, remember, that running and operational costs for airlines far exceed just aviation fuel. Indeed, apparently from all the statistics we've received, aviation fuel is about 35% of domestic airlines' general operations. So I think maybe there are other things too that we would have to review and look at to create a better enabling environment for our domestic airlines to thrive. And I think the ministry is there to see to that, and hopefully we will engage them and find ways of ameliorating some of these challenges that they face as an industry.
Okay, so finally, before you go, tell us what the future holds for the local industry.
the future is bright. I think there's opportunity for growth, considering the number of passengers that we're seeing today. I'm sure 5 years from now, when we are finished with the upgrade of all these airports, what we will be experiencing will be phenomenal growth. Remember that Ghana as an investment site is very attractive. Secondly, as a tourist destination, likewise. So what we are looking to do is to modernize our airports. Build airport cities, not just an airport where you just go to check in and leave, but build cities where people can go for tourist purposes, for shopping and relaxation generally. I think the remodeling of our airports will probably take us to the actual middle income status that we all seek to achieve. And
when it eventually happens.
Definitely, and it will happen in our lifetime.
Okay. Many thanks for your time this morning. I've been speaking with Mrs. Joyce Mokhtari, who's the Deputy Minister for Transport, and we've been talking about Ghana's domestic aviation industry. Once again, many thanks for your time this morning. This has been our business segment. New Day will return shortly.